Okay, World Cup 2026. I don't know about you, but I have been quite enjoying it. I've been watching pretty much every game. But this video, I wanted to talk about a couple of the controversial things that have been going on lately, as well as just some takes that I think most people don't have about the tournament. Pretty much going to go in order. So the first thing I want to focus on is that moment in the first game, well, Argentina's first game, where a lot of people say Messi should have gotten a red card. So obviously, I watched that game live like I did most of the group stage games. I think I only ended up missing like four or so out of all the group stage games due to like having to get groceries and stuff. But I watched that game live. I am a fan of Messi and Argentina, although they're not my favorite team. I do prefer Messi over Ronaldo, and I know some people will take that to assume that I am biased in some way. But I've also refed games when I was younger, as one of my first jobs was a referee. So I feel like I'm pretty good at trying to stay unbiased when looking at refereeing decisions. Though I'm sure some people will disagree with me. Now, when I was watching the game, because I am a fan of Messi and Argentina, I saw that foul, and my initial thought was, "Uh-oh, that could be something he's red carded for." Especially having seen stuff in the Premier League, people getting red carded for things like that, I did think that it was possible. I didn't think it was a clear and obvious red card like some people claim it is. And I think the only thing that really saved him, besides maybe a little bit of that subconscious bias, I don't agree with the idea that it was purposeful bias, but I can understand subconscious bias. The only thing that I think really saved him was his reaction the moment the contact was made. If you watch the clip back, the second his foot touches the calf, he's pulling his foot away and pulling out of the tackle. If he had kept his foot going through, I would be for sure that that should have been a red card. I think the only reason VAR didn't give it to him was because of that pullback right after he touched and the fact that there wasn't much force in it, especially when it's compared to that situation that I will be talking about in a minute that a lot of people compared it to with Balogun. Let's try this. Damn, I knew that was going to happen. uh, no, but I got three aces now. Let's discard this jack and see what I get. A seven, but I can get to a full house now. Back there. There we go. So some people claim it's bias for Messi that he didn't get sent off. I do think that while I've seen it given in other situations, I don't think it's such a clear and obvious red card that I'm disappointed it wasn't given. Like, it's one of those ones, I like to call them orange cards, where if it's given, I'm okay with it. If it's not given, I'm okay with it. And this was one of those situations. Taking that, though, and moving on to the Balogun incident, I think it's a very similar orange card situation. I don't think he was necessarily committing a foul. Like, I've seen some videos and some people talking about where the foul was actually committed by the other player and he just lands on his foot. But I do see why it could be given as a red card, especially with the review and the clips that were shown. Now, supposedly the fact that they did slow motion and still shots is the reason that FIFA has overturned the red card or suspended the red card, not overturned. But at the same time, FIFA hasn't actually, I don't think, come out and actually said that. So, of course, no one knows. And of course, the whole situation with Trump getting himself involved and claiming he's the one that did it surely doesn't look good, whether or not it's true. But people comparing those two moments, the Balogun incident was definitely more of a red card to me than the Messi incident. Even if, again, it's one of those orange ones where if it had not been given, I'd have been okay with it. And if it was given, I was okay with it, even if I didn't like it, because of course I'm American and I'm a USA fan and I wanted us to win. Not the whole thing. I knew we wouldn't do that, but I wanted us to get as far as we could. And I think that whole situation, even if we played really bad against Belgium anyway, I'm thinking that's part of the reason why we played pretty bad. But to compare both of them to another incident that I'm rather familiar with was because I watch Premier League a lot, and I'm a Tottenham fan. I watched the Liverpool versus Tottenham game a couple months ago, where Xavi got sent off for a very similar foul between these two incidents. But again, I think the reason his was sent off versus Messi, and as well as why Balogun was sent off, was because they didn't pull out of the tackle. Now, obviously, Premier League I think was also a little bit harsher about that, and they showed this throughout the whole tournament that in the World Cup they were going to be not quite as harsh as the Premier League is on those sort of mistimed tackles where the studs hit the calf. And a lot of people who blame FIFA for not sending off Messi are ignoring a lot of other situations throughout the tournament where someone did something very similar and wasn't sent off. But a lot of people call out specifically the Balogun and Kwanzaa incidents where somebody did get sent off for a somewhat similar challenge to what Messi did, even if Messi's was a lot less of a danger than the other two were. But if we look at the Xavi incident with Liverpool and Tottenham, again, he came down, mistimed it, hit the calf, but he didn't pull his foot away out of the tackle and it went through. And again, it's one of those orange cards where if it's given, I'm disappointed being a Tottenham fan, but I understand. If it wasn't given, I'd be disappointed if I was a Liverpool fan, but I'd understand. And if I was going to rank the three of them, I think Balogun's is the worst, even if it's less purposeful. It still is the worst of the, especially to the player that got stepped on. Like it looks the worst on the review, and it looks more like a red card than the other two. Xavi's is in the middle, and Messi's is slightly below Xavi, but mainly because he pulls out again versus steps through. Now, if we continue looking on later into the tournament, a lot of people are talking about how Argentina seems like they've been favored and how FIFA's trying to make sure Argentina wins this tournament. I very much disagree with that. And a lot of that is because if you look at the games Argentina had, even if there are some foul, like, yes, I understand people complaining about some of the calls being in Argentina's favors. None of the calls were wrong. They were all like correct calls. But on top of that is Argentina barely survived basically every game they were in. Like if FIFA was trying to rig this for Argentina, it would have been a lot easier for Argentina to get to the final than it ended up being. A lot of the calls I feel like people are claiming wouldn't be called for other teams, but they were. I think the most controversial one, I guess, was that one Egypt goal that was called back, where they went back to the beginning of the attacking phase and gave the foul and took away the goal. But if you've watched games in other leagues, that happens. It's not the most common thing. The main one I remember is one of the first times VAR was introduced. Being an American, I watched the MLS games, and there was a game between San Jose and Atlanta, and I'm, again, an Atlanta fan. Atlanta was down 3-1. I think it was their first, maybe the second season. It was really early, like 2017, 2018. They were down 3-1. They went forward for an attack, lost the ball. San Jose went to the other end and scored. VAR came up and reviewed it, and there was a foul on an Atlanta player in the box. Goal was overturned. Atlanta was given a penalty, and Atlanta ended up turning that game around fully and winning 4-3. So that was much longer between the foul and the goal than it was in this situation. And while Argentina probably should have done better on defending that Egypt goal, because I think it didn't quite meg the player, it got pretty close to megging at least one, if not two, of the Argentina players, and they were close to hitting it out of the way. The attacking phase never changed. It went straight from Egypt player to Egypt player all the way up to the goal. That's what the attacking phase of play is. There was no back passing. There was no slowing down. There was no turnover of possession. It's the attacking phase of play, and it was a foul. Even if it was a slightly soft foul, I feel like in VAR situations, especially like that, where there's a foul in the build-up, they're more likely to give a softer foul because they don't want a foul leading towards a goal. I saw some people saying, well, the center referee saw the foul and didn't call it, but the point of VAR is to identify those situations the referee may have seen wrong. Now, obviously, we're not privy to the communication between VAR and the ref, but at least the way I think they would do it would be like, hey, we saw this. The VAR would be telling the center ref, hey, we saw a foul in the build-up. Go check the monitor. I'm sure they'll use more official wording, and they're not trying to create bias there. But if the referee saw the foul originally and decided it wasn't a foul, then he would either tell them, no, I saw that and not go check and just leave it as is, or go check and then not change his decision. Now, to avoid talking about Argentina the whole time, need to talk about some of the other teams, like how good Spain and France have been. This is after the France versus Spain game, but up until that game, I thought France was the best team in the tournament, just overall. And Spain was as good if they struggled a little bit on their scoring, but they were defensively really solid. Even the Belgium goal, the one goal, really was more luck on Belgium's part. While it was a well worked one, it was one of the few times maybe Spain kind of fell asleep a little bit. But for the entire tournament to let in a single goal up to this point, right before the final, is ridiculous. And I watched that France and Spain game really expecting a much better game. I was rooting for Spain, so I'm happy Spain won. I like Spain over France. I like Lamine Yamal, some of the players on the Spain team. Also, if I can't decide between two, I usually pick who's got a player on one of my teams, and they have, of course, Spain has Pedro Porro, who scored a goal in that game, even better. Um, but if you look at the other side of the bracket, England has also been really good this whole tournament. The only game I think, like I know there's been a lot of controversy from the English media about them not playing good sometimes, but I think the only game they were actually not good in was the Panama game. They drew 0-0. DR Congo, yeah, they struggled in that game, but they were still good and they still dominated and they did end up getting the win, which is what they needed. And I saw a lot of people, again, leaning towards my Tottenham bias here, blaming Jed Spence for that first goal and for his failures in that DR Congo game, but I don't necessarily think that was his fault. And from when I was watching the game, especially that goal, I mean, he was left on his own to defend two players, picked one and had to run to try to get the other, and still almost made it, even if the goal ended up going in. And Pickford probably should have covered his near post a little bit better than that. Some of the criticism against Jed Spence in that game, I think, was a little unfounded, and I think the way he played later in the tournament really, at least in my opinion, hopefully turned people's opinions around. And I have seen some rumors that Tottenham might be trying to sell him, and I liked him before the tournament, and I really hope they decide not to sell him because I think he did well enough to justify him staying. But we'll see how that goes. Even though England ended up losing to Argentina, I do think England played well in that game up until the England goal. Really, it was 50-50. I didn't know who was going to be winning. I was happy with whoever won that game, so I wasn't even rooting for anybody in that game because I was like, well, I like Argentina, I like England, I'm happy with either one of them going through. And up until the England goal, it seemed like it could be anybody's game. England scored. My first thought was, well, Argentina's out. Let's see if they can do it again. I doubt it. And they had a couple good chances, but England looked like they were holding it until the last couple of minutes with those two Messi assists. And I've seen some people blaming Thomas Tuchel for going too defensive, but I thought England has been really good defensively, especially like that's what they did in the Mexico game and they survived there. That's what they did in their last game against Norway too, a little bit near the end, especially when they were up. So I'm not too surprised that he tried to do that, and it almost worked. I mean, they were, 8 minutes before the end of the game when they scored the first goal? I mean, not counting the added time. England almost did it, and unfortunately for them, they're going to go back to another third place game. Hopefully they win this one, because I would prefer England over France, I think. Plus, I think in the last World Cup, that England versus France game was one of the best games of the tournament. Obviously, besides the final was ridiculous. But the England-France game was a really good game that England, the only team in that tournament, I think, besides obviously Argentina, who ended up winning, who really probably should have beaten France. Maybe, I mean, I think if I remember correctly, Morocco actually did play really well against France, but they didn't get a lot of shots, and they let in that early goal, so that kind of contributed towards them playing well. Now, Argentina has had the easiest path through the knockout rounds, although easiest if you look at the rankings, not necessarily the games. I think Argentina has struggled in quite a few of their games, which to me is all the more impressive that they made it to the final when they struggled as bad as they did against Cape Verde and Egypt and even Switzerland up until the red card, which another justified decision there. Like, I get that it's an unfortunate second yellow to be given a second yellow for diving, especially on a VAR mistaken identity call, but they did that earlier in the tournament with the USA versus Paraguay game, which obviously was the first time that that's happened as far as I'm aware. I thought it was really interesting that they were doing that. I also personally, I really hate when people dive and simulate. So I'm happy to be giving cards for simulation, although I can understand his being a little harsh on the simulation because he was expecting the contact and trying to like get out of the well, maybe not get out of the way, but trying to like absorb the contact. I guess contact is the best way to put it. Ended up not coming until he stuck his own leg out and hit the player, which is why he got the simulated yellow card. And it's just extra unfortunate that it was his second yellow card. So I can definitely understand Swiss fans and people who don't like Argentina being a little annoyed about that one. But at the same time, again, it was a good call. It was the right call. I would much rather give cards for simulation than not because it's one of those things I would love to take out of the game if we could. I'm not the harshest of let's give red card for simulation because that seems a little too harsh. There are moments, of course, where it's not purposeful simulation. I think there was one with England. I don't remember who they were playing where he went around the goalkeeper and the goalkeeper missed the ball and he kind of dived over his hands. But to me, that one wasn't simulation because even if there was no contact, like it was basically unavoidable at that point, and like there was going to be contact if he didn't dive over his hands. So situations like that, still like you can still get a foul for no contact, in my opinion. I know it's not always given, but sometimes these justifications of no contact, no foul, or contact on the ball means no foul. It's a little too much of a hard line. There are cases where you can touch the ball and still cause a foul, like the Kwanzaa moment, or cases where you can not touch the player and still cause a foul, almost like the Embolo moment, although the Argentinian player had pulled enough out of the way that I'm like he wouldn't have hit him. But if he had been to the point where he was going to hit him and there was no way around it and he didn't end up actually touching him because Embolo jumped a little bit and fell over, I would consider that a foul. Now, some people claim their easy path was FIFA rigging somehow, but like that's a lot of rigging to try to make sure that all the groups fall in the correct way, to make sure the weakest teams end up on Argentina's side, and then the weakest teams win and progress to give Argentina the easiest chance up. That's a lot of behind the scenes manipulation. And I just don't think, as much as FIFA might want that, because I've like statistical reality of more people watch when Messi's playing is not wrong, just like with Ronaldo. I don't think they're going to be doing that because some of the teams that have to force, I guess, or coerce not to progress don't want Argentina to go on. Like the main team that Argentina would have faced instead of Cape Verde would have been Uruguay. That was probably the favorites to end second in that group, behind Spain, of course, and Cape Verde ended up second, and Cape Verde played Argentina right away. So it would have been Argentina versus Uruguay. And I can't imagine Uruguay being like, okay, yeah, we won't finish second because we want Argentina to progress. Like they're not gonna want that. They're gonna want to be the ones to knock Argentina out. But anyway, leading into the final and the semifinals, really, even though the semifinals have already been played, um, of the four teams, I mean, I probably would have ranked them just on ability through the tournament: France, Spain, England, Argentina. And so, in my opinion, the two weaker teams in both the semifinals won and are going on to the final. France, again, has been the best team of the tournament. And if any game was rigged, it was someone who convinced France to play like shit against Spain. Because as good as France has been, that was one of the worst games I've ever seen them play. I saw afterwards, I think Didier Deschamps, I hope I said his name right, he said something about the refs were against them or something like that. And I watched that game, but like that was pure Spain domination. Like there wasn't really any calls that were going against France. It's just they couldn't do anything against Spain. Spain was winning all the second balls. They were making great passes, just eating through the France the whole game. France couldn't get anything going. Passes kept getting intercepted, misplayed. It was all Spain, no France. And that game, that was one of the most one-sided games I've seen in a while. And the fact that it was Spain versus France was ridiculous. And I know some people will be like, oh, but the stats show otherwise. And yeah, okay, it's not literally the most one-sided game. Like it was a little more even than that. But for the ability of France versus Spain, it was way more one-sided than it should have been. Spain played excellently, and I did want Spain to do well. They weren't like the ones I thought would win the tournament, but they were one of the ones I hoped would win the tournament that realistically had a chance. Like, obviously, I wanted USA to win, but like we didn't realistically have a chance. We played about as well as we could. Spain, England, those were the two that like I wanted to win and actually had a chance of winning, where Argentina and France were the two that like I expected one of those two would win. So Spain getting to the finals, excellent. England again played really well. They even played good against Argentina, but they just couldn't do it, which some people will say is England's downfall. But in this case, I think it's more Argentina recovery ability in this tournament compared to anything wrong with England. I don't think this was an England failure. I think this was an Argentina success. I'm hoping England wins against France. They played really well against them in the last World Cup. This should be an interesting third place game, and I would love for England to get some redemption from the 2018 World Cup, where they probably should have gone on over Croatia to the final and then lost the third place game as well. So I hope they get at least third place since they're already in the third place game at this point. And then Argentina have survived this tournament somehow. And I say that while also thinking they're better than they were at the last World Cup. The team itself is more well-rounded, a better team. That first game of the tournament, they were ridiculous against, I think it was Algeria. I thought that's how it would be against a lot of their teams in the knockouts, and they barely survived most of them, and then somehow pulled it out. And that's one of the things that's ridiculous about this Argentina team is while I think they're very good, I think they're lucky to have made it to the final, but I think they're also very successful to have made it to the final. And if we look at the Argentina team this year compared to the one at the last World Cup, overall, I think they're a better team. And somehow I think Messi is better this year than he was at the last World Cup. At the last World Cup, I mean, he scored a lot of penalties. He did have some great moments, of course. I think it was the Croatia game he did really well in, and the final, of course, too. But he felt more of a passenger in the last World Cup than he does in this World Cup. In this World Cup, he's like the driving force behind every good moment. In the last World Cup, he of course helped his team, but I don't think he was as influential on each game as a whole, even if he was like the one that scored the deciding goal quite a few times, as he has been in this tournament. And the fact that he's, 39 now versus 36 or 35, whatever it was last time, when people thought he would be finished and not coming back for the next tournament, and then somehow playing better in this tournament is just extra ridiculous. Now, before I wrap up, I do want to talk about the U.S. a little bit because, of course, I am American. I was rooting for us. I was hoping we'd do pretty well. We did about as good as I was initially expecting before the tournament, but after our group stage and that first game against Bosnia-Herzegovina, I was really hoping we'd at least make it past Belgium. And as disappointing as Belgium was up until that point, I don't know if it was the whole Balogun situation that sparked a fire in them or the same Balogun situation kind of disrupting the US. But Belgium played really well in that game. US played really bad in that game. And I think both of them played differently than they had been the rest of the tournament. I think Belgium had been lucky to that point to get to where they were and then played fantastically. And US had played fantastically to get to that point and then played poorly, more like Belgium had earlier in the tournament. And the only saving grace for me is that the Belgium versus Spain game right after, which I think US would have lost that game no matter what, although there was a fun little statistical thing for those that don't know where Spain is on an unbeaten streak. And the last time they were on a 35 game unbeaten streak was when they lost to the US and we ended it. And that game, if we had beat Belgium, would have been their 35th game on the unbeaten streak. And there could have been a nice little symmetry there if we did somehow beat Spain. But the fact that Belgium actually gave Spain their best game to that point, even probably still, even though the final hasn't happened yet, the final might be a better game, I don't know. But the Spain versus France game I thought would be better, but wasn't. The Belgium versus Spain game was a really good game, really actually tough for Spain for the first time, other than the Cape Verde game where they couldn't score. Which I was actually at, by the way, and that was a fantastic experience. It was the only game I could afford to actually make, and that game was amazing. Even though I was obviously rooting for Spain, I had no idea who Cape Verde was at the time. Cabo Verde, I guess. That Spain versus Cabo Verde game, and my wife and I ended up becoming fans of theirs and enjoying watching every one of their games. My wife bought one of their jerseys, followed Vizinha on Instagram and everything. I'm not an Instagram person, so I didn't follow anybody. But we really enjoyed that game, even though it was a 0-0 game. I would have liked to have seen a World Cup goal, but as good as Cabo Verde played the rest of the tournament, I'm happy that I got to see them play as well as Spain play and see Lamine Yamal come out for a little bit. That was fun. So the only saving grace, at least for me, for the U.S. is that Belgium played really well against Spain. And if they beat us, even if we played poorly and they played really well, maybe we'd have had a better chance against Spain. And if things had gone differently, it could have been a really good tournament. You never know. But we made it to where I was hoping we would make it the bare minimum, and I would have liked to have gone at least one round further. Obviously, I mean, I would want to win the whole thing if that was possible, but that was the highest realistic expectation I thought would be maybe making it past the round of 16 and to the quarterfinals. So, anyway, I've really enjoyed this World Cup. I'm looking forward to the third place game and the final coming up this weekend. So, I hope you guys enjoy it as well.